Oh, hey everyone, Jarrod again, and I wanted to continue what we started last time talking about player engagement and tips and tricks for the table. And so I know, Kevin, you had a wealth of more of tricks for us to dive into to deal with player engagement. And I did mention last time that we had a player on their phone, and we went into like how can we keep players interested in the game.
Right. The curse of the 21st century, the cell phone, yes.
And so you said you had more to talk about in how to make players care about what's happening at the table when it's not their turn.
Absolutely. So what I try to keep in mind is that the players are all partners in this story we're telling together, right? They do not want to watch my movie. They don't want to read my book. They gave up hours of their lives so they could be active participants in the story. So I look for every angle to give players input. I've seen some GMs, in fact, who go much further than I do, and they let players improv things like they'll say, "Oh, you open the door. What do you see?" Like I'm not that far along yet. I'm getting there. We play a lot of Fiasco. We're going to review Fiasco soon. That'll get me there.
We're all getting better at improv. I can tell you that I, as a player, I don't think I'm ready yet for you to open the door and tell me what I see, or me to tell you what I see.
Right.
Because we've had moments where you've turned to me and you said, "Okay, tell me what's happening in this moment," and now I've got to think on my feet. So I wasn't prepared for creating something on the spot.
But I was at a con recently with a GM who did exactly that, and I was like, "Wow, you are amazing, sir." But here's what I do indeed do. I give players playable NPCs, so they're player character, non-player characters, if you will. This all started with Ars Magica, which I did not personally play, but my friends did, and I heard about it. And I heard there's this element in Ars Magica, they call the characters grogs. And they're minor characters that the players play when their wizards are off doing spell research or this kind of thing. So each player plays the wizard, each player plays the wizard's apprentice, and each player has like 3 or 4 townsfolk. And I'll put a link in the doobly-doo for those of you who want more details about how Ars Magica does it.
Well, I'm sorry, is grog a term from that game world?
It is.
Okay,
it is a
so
term.
It's not like an acronym or anything.
No, as far as I know, it doesn't stand for anything
Okay.
except it's just the term they use for these, particularly the townsfolk characters.
Okay.
Again, I haven't personally played Ars Magica. So what I started doing was I started encouraging players to make non-player characters. At the time, I was running a lot of superhero games. And superhero games can always do with the person on the street and the arch enemy and the J. Jonah Jameson rival to another player's Spider-Man, all of these kinds of characters and rivalries that I thought the players would also be more invested in if, for instance, I create a character who's a person on the street who's maybe an investigative journalist who hates your superhero. So here I am, I'm a player at the table bringing complications into another hero's life. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of scenes that I'm not in, well, then my NPC could show up and he could like ask you embarrassing questions while you're trying to fight Dr. Evil or, this kind of thing. And so we played a lot with that. And I liked it as a way to let the players put their thumb down and put their mark on the world. And I liked it as a way that players could influence the tone of a game, because the kind of characters they introduce and the kind of conflicts they introduce are a huge flag to what that player wants out of the play experience. So for those reasons, I liked it a lot. Now, what I've started doing more recently is I've started getting more and more into the idea of players playing the surroundings, and I've supplied the characters. And this is what I've been playing with a lot. And we've talked about this in our recaps on Fantasy Age. And so, in fact, the example I have set out here comes from the very first session. I wanted to do this scene in which Josh's character, who's a newly minted lieutenant, gets his first orders for a mission. And the mission was going to involve all of the lieutenants and the soldiers under them. So that meant that Josh's character was going to come in and get given a whole bunch of orders, and there was nothing for the other player characters to do except watch Josh's character get those orders. Mm-hmm. So instead of that, I kept only 2 characters. I kept the captain of the guard, and I kept the captain of the guard's father. And Then the other characters I passed out to the players. So I had one of the other players playing one of the other lieutenants in the village, in the Sky City, and another player playing that player's squire. And then I had two more players, and they were each playing the lieutenant and squire from another pairing, because this is a pretty small town. They've only got 3 lieutenants. And each player, what I do when they get their card, the picture and the name of the character is here, but on the back are some general notes about how to role play that character and what their objectives are in the long run. So this meant that on the very first session, when we sat down to play, Josh brings his character in and gets given a mission. Everybody else gets a glimpse into what kind of world I've put in front of them. Because
now we get a third-party view.
Exactly.
Versus being stuck in our individual first-person views.
Exactly. And people even started pushing some plot elements right there in the first session. They noticed, oh, this character, he wants to move up to this position later, so he's probably going to be doing this kind of thing. And this character has this kind of loyalty, so she's probably going to be doing this. And again, it's much more than I could have thought of on my own. And it empowers the players, and it gives them a reason to be engaged. They are actively playing. They're not watching Josh's scene. They're not sitting around and waiting.
So as a player who doesn't have a whole lot of improv background, I appreciated that you gave us the text, right? So you said, okay, this is the lieutenant. She's the daughter of a counselor. She shares her father's ambition, so player as ambitious. And she's patient, but she will duel if she gets into an argument with someone. So now, as a character, if I were playing this, or as a player, if I'm playing this character, I don't have to sit here going, oh, you've handed me some picture and a name. Now I have to create from nothing. Now I have lines in which to color in. So therefore, it reduces some of that anxiety from me. It reduces some of that decision fatigue from me. And I can play her as part of this world, but make sure that, since I have boundaries, we know who she's going to be no matter who plays her.
Right. We use this technique in another way in our sci-fi campaign. So in the sci-fi campaign, folks, the story had reached kind of a pivotal moment. The humans had made first contact with aliens way out in deep space, and the aliens had offered to the players that humanity could come join the Galactic Federation. And again, I'm going to talk Star Trek because that's how I talk. And the players looked around and they were like, well, we're not sure we want to join, and we're not sure we're qualified to make that decision.
You said players, you put it all on my shoulders as the ranking character in the room.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, my second command of the starship, number 2, is making all of these decisions for humanity as a whole. And I kind of froze at some parts because.
Well, that's legit. I mean, they honestly were trying to bull you into it. They were trying to push you in. They wanted you to agree, and they didn't want you to stop and have your own opinion. So that you froze and halted and said, wait a minute. I'm just the number 2 guy on one ship. I can't make decisions for all of humanity, was the right decision. So we get together in the next session. We planned it a little bit ahead of time. And again, I had my cards, but this time each card was a diplomat, and we basically had a mock United Nations. I served as the chair of the UN, but I didn't do much else. The players did most of the negotiating. Each player was given the ambassador for a large chunk of humanity, and we scrunched things down a little bit because, of course, the real United Nations has over 100 nations.
We did an updated version of the Security Council.
Yes, it was much more like the Security Council was having a meeting.
But they had like proxy votes of their regions to some extent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And each player got a list of objectives for their faction. And then I just pulled back and let the negotiations happen. And honestly, when I sat down at the table, I had no idea what my campaign was going to look like at the other end. This was the first time I've sat down in years that I had no long-term plans for the game, because I had to wait and find out what you folks negotiated. John negotiated very aggressively for the African Union, and he was able to get a lot of good positioning. And I know Danielle was a pretty aggressive negotiator, as she often is. And so again, this is a way that you can let the players take a huge active role in the way the campaign proceeds.
And I just want to speak again to how you design this. You know, you can't just, I mean, you can just tell other game masters, here's what I do, and you emulate. But I think the more scaffolding you can build into it,
Right.
and they can choose what to keep or throw away. So
And absolutely, each GM needs to pick what feels right for their style.
But as the player who played China, I think, you didn't simply give me a card with personal ambitions and background. You gave me 2 whole pieces of paper, 3 pieces of paper, because it was, here's your country, here's what their goals are, and here are a few hints on how to get there. So you suggested, you know, forming a bloc with the other Asian nations, which I don't think I was able to do right off the bat, because those NPCs were also working their own.
Yes.
You had them working their own political
Yeah,
angles.
there were a couple of small NPC factions, and they showed up at the table with their own objectives as well.
And then you gave us each an intelligence report on what we knew about the other countries or regions at the table, and what we thought their goals would be, as a means of like, who can you ally with, who can you work against, what's going to be important. And after the game, we all, you know, settled off on the couches to talk about what the future gaming would be. And I read through everybody else's intelligence reports, and you had created a different list of bullet points. There were some similarities that you had adjusted, but there was information that Russia knew that I as China didn't know, and I had no way of knowing, and that, you know, colored our negotiations as it does in the real world.
Well, but at the same time, I'm a bit of an overachiever. I got really inspired by this, and I kind of went crazy about it. Plus, I'm a history buff.
But I'd rather tell people, like, what's
Sure.
an upper limit you've hit, and then they can cut back if
got
they
you.
will, or they can give the players more agency if they will.
I would have been pretty okay if I had just given somebody a card with a flag on one side and said, USA, you want this, 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 you're worried about this, go. But because I had a few weeks to plan between sessions, and that helps a lot. We only do our campaigns, we only meet once a month, so I have time to plan. Those hard-working GMs out there that are running every week, I'm not sure I could do this level of prep. I certainly couldn't back when I was running once a week. And that did enable me to give each player character some customized intel, and gave me a new vector to give people a look into the campaign world without me just sitting behind my screen and reciting blocks and blocks of flavor text. And that's really my big thing is keep the players active, give them jobs to do, and just go to town with it, and you can really get some good stuff done.
Yes, as a player who's been in 4 of your games now.
Three so
Three
far.
major games.
Yep.
And then we've done other.
We've done some
role-playing
one shots,
sessions.
yeah.
You know, it started off. You told me, okay, you rolled it. You failed against what we were playing the Harry Potter version game, and you failed against some bully's curse. What is the curse? And so I had to come up with, I guess my shoelaces keep tying to themselves, and I keep tripping.
Yes.
And so I got some agency there. And then it started turning into, okay, you know, you're a major character in this story. This isn't happening to you, it's happening with you. And
Or because of you.
Or because of you. And so now we could start talking through where you want to go in the world. What do we want to see? Because at our table, there's no real fear about player knowledge being kept separate from character knowledge. We're all adults.
Oh no, we're going to have to do a whole other story about that. But the short version is, folks, I believe that it is a great thing when characters have secrets from each other, and a terrible thing when players have secrets from each other. I trust the players to play out the drama of one character knowing a secret that another doesn't. And we're going to come back to that in another one of our talks.
Yes. But me as a player, I'm engaged now because I've put my thumbprint on it, as you said earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Here's one last trick that I've pulled in terms of playable NPCs. On occasion, I've wanted to do some of those classic moments, like one player character gets kidnapped and the other player characters have to search for them. Now, I was on the receiving end of this once. My character was locked up in prison. And let me tell you about your player character being locked up in prison. There is nothing to do. I turned around, I got on the DM's computer, and I played video games for the entire session. And everybody else loved it, and I had a good time playing video games. So when I decided I wanted to do that, I thought back to that experience, and I came up with 2 solutions. One is, obviously it works fine if you've got a player who's going to be absent anyway. But if that player is there and you want to do it, here's what I did. I kidnapped a player, and then I had that player play a bounty hunter who wanted to help the other PCs catch the banditos, because this was a Wild West game, the bandits who had kidnapped this player character. At the same time, we were doing cutscenes in which the player whose character was kidnapped was playing herself, and all the other players at the table were playing the bandits that kidnapped her.
Okay.
And they had grabbed her because they saw the players, who were themselves bounty hunters, flashing a lot of money. So they thought this was a good opportunity for a kidnapping. Well, first of all, they didn't realize how badass she was, because she was actually the toughest member of the party. And second, they didn't realize how smart she was, right? So the players all put themselves in the mindset of the criminals who had kidnapped them, and realizing that they had caught a much bigger fish than their little guppy mouths could swallow. And at the same time, we were jumping over to the player characters. And so we got to see both halves of the story, and everything was played by a player at the table. Over the course of the session, I was nothing but sort of your standard NPCs. And at one point, I was a local connected person who would sell them information for a price. And he charged them some amount of money, which was offensive, but they knew they had to pay it. And also, GMs, this was how I got some extra money out of my players' hands, because they had too much. And that's a third way that you could let players play NPCs in your game to keep everybody engaged and keep the story moving.
All right. Well, thank you. I think this hopefully was productive for people.
I hope so.
And I guess we'll get into player versus character knowledge. We've touched upon it multiple times, but I think it is time to talk about what can be separate and what are we afraid of.
Yeah, we'll have to do that soon.
All right. So thanks for watching, and tune back again for tips for the table.